one thing I'll talk about today, probably be a little bit of a short lesson, but we're talking about essentially how to keep your reader excited and reading from beginning to end. I know I've gone through something like this for a billionth time, but it's really important to always remember what's going on. So you have in the opening of your book, nonfiction is pretty easy. I can give you the kind of nonfiction way. So the way to grip the readers is the first chapter is selling the book to an extent. And what you're doing is you're smashing the entire book into one chapter. Then the second chapter is outlining the argument, which is almost like a little bit of and then you might have part one. So let's say you have part two, like your big ideas. And then let's say you have part three. And by nonfiction, I mean, in this case, you're teaching something. Narrative nonfiction is going to have the same vibe as fiction. If you're writing a memoir, a biography, or something like that, it's going to be more in the style of fiction. But the idea is you propose the problem. Hey, there's this problem that we have. You start with a story, and then you have your thesis, and then you have nuts and bolts, which is how to. Then you usually tell another story, plus another story, and then you wrap it up. And this is where you get people hooked. Introduce the next problem, which will solve in the next chapter. Think about the pattern here, what's actually happening. In nonfiction, this is essentially the little outline of every single chapter. So every chapter is going to be like this. And so you have part one, and then you have chapter. And every chapter is going to essentially be like this over and over again. So think about what you're doing fundamentally is opening up a curiosity stream. In the beginning, you're saying, this is an important book because we're going to teach you something important. It's going to help you. Then you start talking about essentially everything that you're going to talk about in the book, but in a very short format. And what that does is it gets people excited about finishing the book because they realize, oh man, every single chapter is going to be really exciting. So this is alluding to the rest of the book, which is exciting. But what you're also doing in this case, the problem that you're bringing up in the beginning is going to push to the how-to. You're essentially saying, hey, I want to propose a problem here. I'm going to tell you a little bit of an interesting story to make it anecdotal, but I'm going to tell you the how to solve this problem. Then once you've done that, what people are going to think, is this actually true or is this just an anecdote? And so then you essentially have more and more evidence. You tell additional stories, maybe you give different case studies, additional evidence, you wrap it up, restate the thesis, but this is where the most important part is. The most important part is that this is leading to the next chapter. So if you think about this, what you're doing is you're like walking them along this path. You're giving them the reason why I want to read the whole book to the end is because of the second chapter. And the reason why I want to continue reading the first chapter is because I want a solution to the problem that you proposed. And the reason why I want to continue reading the next chapter is because you alluded to the next problem, which you're like, yeah, that's right. I know I figured out how to solve the funnel problem, but how do I get leads? Or I know I solved my personal journey with spirituality, but how do I align it with my career? Whatever, you're bringing up some additional problem. And so you're essentially giving people these lily pads in nonfiction where every single time they want to continue reading the next chapter because you're alluding to the next problem. They're like, yeah, that is a problem. I want to have that problem solved. And so it ends up becoming this lily pad, and then they can't put the book down and they have to read the whole way through. Another thing that's just obvious is choosing the right stories. So if you choose the right stories in nonfiction, that'll make it interesting. But also, if you do this lily pad where you're proposing a problem, then you give the solution, and then you're alluding to the next problem, all of a sudden there's no reason for the reader to stop reading. So this is the way to do nonfiction. Fiction's a little bit more complicated, but we'll go through it together. Fiction, you have your basic story for your protagonist or hero, and you remember they have two problems. So there's always two problems. There's the A problem, which is external. The thing they want to win the race, they want to beat the bad guy, they want to save the team, they want to save their marriage, they want to find love, whatever that may be. And then the B problem is the internal place that they have, which is essentially the thing that they have to get over in order to solve the A problem. So this is like very basic 101 of every story. You got to know this about your main hero. Then you also have the antagonist. You remember the antagonist is setting, person, and internal. So the thing that's holding them back, it could be like some government that's setting, it could be their family, then it could be like an actual person, a villain, and then there's some internal antagonist that's holding them back. This is like the basic story structure of what you need in order to tell a story. Then you combine this with the hero's journey. So you have old world, you introduce character. I promise I'm gonna get this to how you can keep the readers hooked. So you have the old world, and then what happens in the beginning? What happens here? What's the first thing that happens? Eventually you're gonna have the climax, and you're gonna have the conclusion, and then it comes back to the old world, and you have the classic hero's journey, except they learned something or they got something, like the ring or the powerful sword or whatever it may be. So what is this called? This is meet mentor. What am I describing here? Hero's journey, right? So you have the big hero's journey. That's what we're doing here. And this is call to adventure, right? So this is like introducing the big A story. What do they want? And then right before that is the inciting incident. Once you realize this, you're going to realize the patterns here are pretty extreme. So inciting incident, call to adventure. Then there's some kind of resistance. You should know all of these beats in your story. There's resistance, and then there's new world. The new world is very important for fantasy or science fiction, but it's also important for anything. The new world could be like a new job. The new world could be now they got married. The new world could be they're on vacation with someone, and there could be they're going on a road trip, but nonetheless, there's like some kind of new world, either physically in a new setting or emotionally, or something happens. And then what do you have? You have trials where they learn. There's a bunch of trials in the middle. This is a great middle. And then eventually you have climax, you have resolution. Do you remember what the difference between a climax and a resolution is? Climax is essentially where they have to make their decision to do the right thing. And then the resolution is what happens because they do the right thing. This is essentially like the main story structure for all fiction, all great fiction. And even literary fiction that seems like it's not as complex, it actually has this built into it, but it's just a little bit more subtle. And a lot of the problems are a little bit more internal. This is essentially what all great fiction looks like. Now, different genres all have something different that's going on that make them their particular genre. So the problem in a romance is that they want to find love and they're having a hard time finding the right person. For example, in fantasy and science fiction, the antagonist of the setting is very important, and you end up this new world part is very big in science fiction and fantasy because you have to create all of these different rules and laws and physics and different families and all sorts of different stuff. Or, for example, if you're writing like a sports book or a book where there's some kind of obvious prize, usually the mentor part is very important. Think about Rocky or something. The coach is a very important aspect of sports, or even a chess story or anything that has an obvious prize at the end. Then the meet the mentor section is going to be very long and very important. And if you think of the books and stories that have sold the most in the history of the world, they essentially combine all of these. So you think Star Wars, Meet the Mentor, Yoda is obviously like really important. The New World is crazy. The Call to Adventure is going to a completely different universe. And the inciting incident is that all these planets are going to be destroyed. In the greatest stories, it's bigger. So you increase the stakes and make everything much grander. Avatar, the whole world is going to be destroyed. Or The Matrix, the new world is this science fiction crazy thing that we could have never saw coming. So the bigger and the more intense the story is, the more intense all of these parts will be. So watch this. This is going to probably make you a little uncomfortable, but it is what it is. So imagine if you had this, but it also applied to every chapter. Just the same that after you resolve the problem in nonfiction, you also introduced a new problem. You're probably going to notice what's going to happen here. Within each chapter, And actually in screenplay writing, they say that even every beat and every scene should have sort of a version of this. So the resolution is going to be very important at the end of every chapter. So the resolution is going to open up new questions. So they solve the problem of that chapter. There's some big problem. Think of Lord of the Rings. So you're like, oh, I want to get the ring so that the bad guy doesn't get the ring. Okay, cool. So that's like the big adventure. And that big adventure is going to last not only over the course of one book, but it's actually going to last over the course of 4 books. There's a Hobbit, and then there's a 3 Lord of the Rings books, and it's a massive thing. So it follows the hero's journey through 4 books. We had a whole lesson on how to write series. So that's going to be very long. But also every book has its own beginning, middle, and end arc. And every chapter, in fact, if it's good, and this is most obvious in mysteries or thrillers, it will open up a new question. So it will resolve one of the questions, one of the problems that arises, a problem of that chapter. It won't always solve the internal problem. Usually the internal problems are not chapter by chapter, but usually there's some external problem. Think of it like a video game. You have this one video game level you got to beat. You got to jump over the mushroom land, and then you got to beat the lizard boss. But that doesn't mean that the video game is over. That just means that now you have to go to the next level. And on the next level, there's going to be a new boss. And so the trick is to open up a new question that is a result of the resolution of that chapter, which is the inciting incident of the next chapter. And so now what you end up doing is you're connecting the dots between every single chapter. This ends up becoming just over and over again, except with the resolution, open up new question or new problem. And that is essentially the inciting incident of the next chapter. This is actually easier in just traditional narrative fiction, but in a thriller or a mystery, you have to add multiple questions, multiple clues, multiple mysteries per chapter. And then what ends up happening in mysteries and thrillers is that a lot of the times the question is not answered. This is a little bit more advanced, but this question might be answered in chapter 5 or chapter 6 or chapter 7. And instead of opening up one question, it might open up multiple questions. So it ends up becoming this follow the yellow brick road where you're like, oh, what are they going to do about the guy who looks like the killer? Is he really the killer? It's, oh, you're not going to really know the answer until like chapter 8. And so what you're doing is you're giving people a beginning, middle, and end in every chapter, but you're also over the course of time putting these dangling carrots that you're not going to resolve or answer until chapter 5, 6, 9, 12. And then at the end, you want to wrap everything up. And if you want to be like an artist and keep everything open-ended, like that's good for you, that's fine. But most great works are not that open-ended. There is a resolution to pretty much every problem. So essentially, the big idea here is it's very similar, actually, if you notice this. So you have this big problem that you're trying to help people with, how to make a garden in your backyard on a budget. That's your how-to book. Maybe I'm going to teach you, these are the 15 steps to make a garden in your backyard. Cool. One of the problems is, yeah, but my yard is really small. Okay, cool. And let me teach you how to approach it, even if your yard is really small. And then you say, my yard is really small, but I have to deal with my HOA or something. Let me do another chapter on how to deal with your HOA. And then you say, okay, I deal with the HOA, but how are you going to deal with like different climates? Well, my climate is like a little bit colder. My climate is a little bit blah, blah. In the next chapter, we're going to make sure that you understand how to deal with it, even if you're in a climate. Now I know how to deal with climate. What do I do if I'm traveling? You know, how does that work? Okay, let me do a chapter on how does it travel. So you're opening up the next problem and then you're solving that in the next chapter. So I'm going to keep on reading. The same thing applies to fiction. You're just condensing the hero's journey, this standard way that we like to experience stories, except instead of just concluding it and we're done, which only happens at the end of the book or the end of the series, you're opening up these questions so that it leads to me wanting to know the answer to that question, which means that I'm going to read the next chapter. So you're reading your book and you got to ask yourself that I literally do this when I'm like, what is the problem? What is the main problem? What is the sub problem? And then what is the new problem? And then I often will, especially in fiction, I will do this. Will he make the team? And then the sub problem is, will he forgive his dad? And then the solution is, yes and yes. Cool. I'll close those loops in that chapter. But the new problem is, will he make varsity? And then another new problem is, will his dad accept his forgiveness? Now, just imagine this is a random chapter in the story of a kid that's trying to win the basketball championship. So in that chapter, he's on the tryouts. Will he make the team? The sub problem is he's going to have to forgive his dad for being harsh with him when he was young. And so then at the end of the chapter, it's yes, he did make the team and he did forgive his dad. But then is that the story? Is it over? No, it's not over because it's, yeah, but at the end of the chapter, it's like, okay, congratulations. But in the next month, we're going to figure out who's going to make varsity. And now you're thinking, is he going to make varsity? You're opening up this new question, which will result in a new chapter, a new storyline, essentially, another level of the video game. And then maybe he sends a text message to his dad and says, hey, by the way, I made the team and I forgive you for everything that you've done for me. And then at the end, he texts him back, forgive me for what? And so now imagine that it's just a little chapter in this story of this kid who's trying to make the basketball team. You opened up a problem. There's some stakes. There's some interesting thing. It's the problem. How is he going to solve it? Okay, we solved that problem. But also now we have these two new problems that I want to know the answer to in the next chapter, which is why I'm going to continue reading. Because every time you're writing a chapter, consciously ask yourself, what question did I open up or what new problem did I open up such that I want to, continue watching? You think of this as if you watch like soap operas or serialized stories, like I always tell you guys, don't be just a consumer. If you're trying to be a professional artist, if you're trying to be a professional writer, if you're trying to be a professional storyteller, if you're trying to be a professional nonfiction author, then you have to not view the lens through just observing. It's very difficult for me to watch television or movies with my wife because she's always, don't tell me anything because I can predict what's going to happen or I can predict things that are very subtle, but you might not even be conscious of it, but you're like, why did they introduce this character that gave a side eye to this character? That nothing happens on accident. So it's like what they're doing is very subtly being like, who is this character? Is that character a bad guy? Are they gonna stop them from accomplishing what they want? And even if it's super subtle, introducing a character but not giving a lot of information about them and being mysterious, or introducing a clue in a fantasy. The sword of Xiron only works when the sun's out. And so you're like, is the sun going to be out in 4 chapters from now? And what problems is that going to cause? So just these tiny little subtle things and start observing them in the books that you're reading, start observing them in the movies that you're watching. If you're watching a movie like tonight or something, or you're watching a show, have a piece of notebook paper or like a journal or something. And if your spouse or the person that you're watching with is supportive of you, hopefully they'll be okay with this. Or you can do it on your own. This is an interesting piece of homework where every time that there's an open-ended question or something that you're asking yourself, like, I wonder who that person is, or I wonder if they're going to do that, or I wonder if they're going to actually take the ride on the train and go to the blah, blah, blah. I wonder if the stock market's going to go up, depending on the story, whatever it may be. Whatever those questions are, stop the movie, stop reading the chapter and take notes. Say, oh, scene